If you're anything like me, you probably like Dragon Ball a lot. And I mean, embarrassingly so. Although, surprisingly, in the past 13 years of me being a fan of the series, I've never watched the original Dragon Ball Z anime in Japanese. Well, I've seen many scenes and the like, but I've never sat down and watched the series in that language. Now, don't get me wrong, I have experienced the franchise. I've read the whole manga from start to finish, and I've watched all of the original Dragon Ball Kai with the American English dub produced by Funimation. But as for the original series television adaptations, the only one I've seen all the way through is Dragon Ball GT. As such, there were many things that I missed out on, the most obvious of which is filler introduced in the animes. Now, everyone has their own opinions of filler, but that's not today's topic. Filler that many people point towards in the franchise tends to be that of the good variety, particularly in the Saiyan arc. According to many fans, this arc has some of the best filler out there and is a shining example of how filler can enhance a story and doesn't always have to weigh it down. Whether or not I agree is a different subject. I'm just here to talk about it. With all that said, given that I had never seen it before, I decided to scrum through some of the Saiyan arc episodes to find some gold. During my look through, I encountered a very interesting episode, episode 20. This episode contains content that is mostly filler. While there are some manga events, most of it comes from right after the commercial break, when Kaio exposits to Goku the history of the Saiyans. All of this content was technically never in the manga, however, most of it was based on a memo that Toriyama had wrote with some creative liberties. And to those of you who didn't know, Gregory the Cricket, as a character, is actually complete filler. He was never in the manga. Although you'd be pretty hard-pressed to realize that without reading it because they integrated him so deeply into the anime, added him to so many scenes that when Dragon Ball Kai came out, they just straight up left him in, presumably because it would have been too much work to try and take him out. That said, there's also small snippets of filler between Piccolo and Gohan training. This is today's video subject. Gohan's filler in this arc is what most fans point to as the best filler in the anime. Roughly 9 minutes into the episode, we see Gohan and Piccolo sparring, with Gohan having successfully dodged some of Piccolo's attacks. Gohan smirks before Piccolo tells him not to get cocky and blasts him in the face, leaving Gohan hanging from a cliffside. Here we get a Scar and Mufasa moment, complete with Piccolo stepping on Gohan's hand and hurtling him down the cliff. Piccolo tells Gohan to climb back up the cliff all on his own. Gohan attempts it once and fails. At this point, Gohan starts yelling at Piccolo, calling him various things, before telling him to say the next one. The scene ends there, with Piccolo looking stoic before cutting to the training between God and the Dragon Team. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the things that Gohan calls Piccolo. In order, he calls him, and pardon my poor Japanese, Risu, Suika, Kamome, Medaka, Kaiju, Ushi, Shirokuma, Mari, Ringo, Gorira, and Raion. And like I mentioned, he follows up by telling Piccolo to say the next one. When translating these things, most of them are pretty agreed upon, with some minor overlap. In the same order, they are roughly squirrel, watermelon, seagull, killifish, which is a sort of small fish, monster, cow, white shark or polar bear, quince or ball, apple, gorilla, and lion. The names don't matter too much for our purposes when translated, we just need to focus on the Japanese names. So why exactly does Gohan just start calling Piccolo random things out of nowhere? My first time watching this scene, I had the same question. It was completely random, and my best guess at the time was to assume it was somehow, in some way, tied to Japanese culture. Well, I was sort of right. What Gohan is doing here is that he's trying to play a Japanese word game with Piccolo called Shiritori, which roughly translates to taking the end. Here's how the game works. In the game, you must have 2 or more people, although in our case just one person basically talking to himself, and each person takes a turn saying a word. However, these words obviously have rules. Firstly, all of them must be nouns. Secondly, no words may be repeated. Thirdly, every word must start with the same sound that the previous word ended with. Here's an example. In our case, our first word is ririsu. The last kana in the word is su, so the following word must begin with su. For us, it would be Suika. The final kana is ka, so the following word begins with ka, and is kamome. Rinse and repeat. So, how do you lose at this game? Well, it's not when you run out of words, it's actually when one of the players ends a word with the sound n. Why? It's because there are no actual words in the Japanese language that start with that sound, so henceforth, the person who says that kana to end a word loses the game. With that in mind, Gohan says gorira, that ends with ra, so the next word starts with ra. The word is rayon, which ends with an n, therefore ending the game. But the punchline is when Gohan tells Piccolo to say the next one, because he literally can't as there are no words to use. That just about covers it, at least in regards to the Japanese version, because I also wanted to take a look at how the English dubs for the series handled it. As you may expect, while the game could work in English, trying to make it do so would be a challenge, let alone while trying to keep it as a faithful translation. Not to mention that it's a game that's not even played in English to begin with, so the odds of people understanding it from the offset is significantly dwindled. As such, it shouldn't be surprising that the dubs for this scene have been heavily altered, in most cases that is. Let's start with Funimation's English dub produced with Saban and the Ocean Group. Due to this dub heavily editing out content, the episode numbering is shifted down from episode 20 to 14. Well, at least most of the content from episode 20 is in edited episode 14, however, our particular scene happens near the end of edited episode 13. So let's talk differences. The scene happens very differently in this dub. Instead of Piccolo hitting Gohan to the ground, then Gohan dodging some of Piccolo's attacks, followed by Piccolo blasting Gohan and telling him not to get cocky, the scene is cut so that right after Piccolo knocks Gohan down, he immediately blasts him. The dialogue is also different. Here, Gohan is given dialogue off-screen exclaiming that Piccolo was being unfair with a cheap shot, with Piccolo's original line being changed to him claiming that Gohan needs to learn that Saiyans aren't going to be fair. Following Piccolo blasting Gohan, that little Lion King moment from the original doesn't happen. He just immediately falls. Piccolo still tells Gohan to climb back up, although adding that he could also just go home. Like in the original, Gohan still tries to climb up the cliff and fails, but unlike in the original, Gohan actually tries it again. Off-screen. It holds onto a single shot of Piccolo with Gohan exclaiming that he's a jerk and that he's climbing back up. We then hear Gohan struggling to climb up, then a bunch of rocks crumbling and a thud implying he fell again, before the scene cuts to Goku chasing Bubbles. The shot of Gohan yelling at the bottom of the cliff is also just never used. As is clearly evident, this scene is not only inaccurate to the original, it flat out omits elements from the original and would obviously make no attempt at adapting the original joke. With that said, let's move on. Fast forwarding to 2005, Funimation had obtained the rights to the first 67 episodes of Dragon Ball Z from Pioneer the previous year. In April of 2005, Funimation began releasing their new home media releases for the show, soon to be cancelled the next year in May, titled the Ultimate Uncut Editions. This set was planned to release a brand new, fully uncut redub of the show, replacing the original Ocean Group dubbing with a new 5.1 audio track, potentially allowing people to watch those first 67 episodes completely uncut. Sadly, only the first 27 episodes of the show were released for the line of DVDs, still leaving 40 episodes without an uncut dub. However, if you've been paying attention, episode 20 would have been released as a part of this line of releases, and was the first time Funimation themselves dubbed the scene in-house. Introduced on set number 7 as part of the Vegeta Saga 1 line, titled Back from the Dead, the set was released on New Year's Day of 2006. Due to this release being uncut, thankfully no content is removed, so the Lion King moment is retained, as well as Gohan yelling at Piccolo from the bottom of the cliff. But what about dialogue differences? Well, for starters, the narrator is added at the beginning scene describing everything that we're just about to see, Piccolo training with Gohan. Thanks for that, you were very helpful and necessary. Instead of Piccolo telling Gohan to get up and not get in over his head because he dodged some attacks, he tells Gohan that he's too much of an easy target for him and lamenting that Gohan figured out how to dodge him, before surprising him and shooting his blast. Piccolo also has a smaller inner dialogue moment just before Gohan starts climbing, saying that at the rate they're going, Gohan won't be able to face the Saiyans. Unlike the Ocean dub, Gohan does not try to climb back up a second time, but instead begs to and bargains with Piccolo to help him back up repeatedly. Well, at least the scene is more accurate than the Ocean dub, what with it being fully uncut this time and some slightly less out there dialogue, albeit not perfect. Fast forwarding again, this time to 2010, Dragon Ball Kai had just been released to the masses in Japan, and in February of 2010, Funimation announced that they would be dubbing the series, claiming that the show would be far more accurate to the original Japanese version. Hopefully a good sign. Funimation began releasing the DVD and Blu-rays for the series in May of 2010, with the line concluding in June of 2012, with all 98 episodes released. I should also mention that the show was initially broadcasted on 2 North American children's television programs named Nicktoons in the CW's Toonzai block, later to be known as Vortex. The Nicktoons broadcast happened mere days after the first home media releases, also in May, while the Toonzai one started in August of 2010. This will actually be relevant later. I swear, please trust me on this. Anyways, what was originally episode 20 in Z became episode 7 in Kai. As many of you should know, Kai is a trimmed down / recut version of the original Dragon Ball Z that removed the vast majority of filler from the show to keep it in line with the original manga. As such, since the majority of content in episode 20 was filler, much of it is cut out, namely Kaio expositing the history of the Saiyans, despite it being based on a Toriyama memo. Then again, many creative liberties were taken, so it makes sense. In terms of all-around Kai cuts, the entire scene is more or less left completely intact, with the sparring being paced a bit faster. Obviously in Japanese, all the dialogue is kept exactly the same, leaving in the Shiritori joke as well, despite the sing being complete filler. As for Funimation's dub, all the dialogue before Gohan yells to Piccolo is incredibly accurate. Telling Gohan to get up? Well, not exactly, he asks him what he's waiting for, but basically the same. Telling Gohan not to get cocky because he dodged a few attacks? Check. Telling Gohan that he's soft before blasting him? Check. Telling Gohan to climb back up the cliff all on his own? Check. Overall, the scene is far more accurate than it's ever been, but like I've said, the Shiritori joke just can't work naturally in English, so of course it just needs to be omitted, even in a more accurate dub. However, at least what Funimation does here is better than what's been done in the past, as even though they do completely replace the dialogue like in their Z dub, it's not just Gohan begging for Piccolo to help him. Rather, it's Gohan stating that he understands Piccolo's training, that he wants to learn to care for himself, and that he'll do whatever he says and will not quit. So here, they try to tap more into the character aspect over trying to adapt an incompatible joke, which I can appreciate and think was a smart move on Funimation's part. Normally, I would leave it at that. However, remember that I mentioned there were 2 broadcasts of this series on children's television networks, Nicktoons and Toonzai? Both of those versions edited content, with Toonzai's being based on the Nicktoons cut, although with even more of their own severe censorship. Nicktoons is generally considered not too bad, akin to the edited broadcast of Z that Funimation has started airing on Toonami with the start of US Season 3, but the CW Toonzai version is said to be as if 4 kids had gotten their hands on Dragon Ball Z instead of One Piece, and that's essentially what this was, as Toonzai was originally a rebranding of the 4Kids network. Why this matters should be fairly obvious. Due to our scene featuring an alien blasting a child with a severe black eye in the face, then sending him hurtling down a cliff, this scene was clearly a mandatory change. Well, not for Nicktoons actually. They more or less kept the scene intact, but Toonzai on the other hand, while the dialogue is left unaltered, we run into a fairly infamous screenshot of what has unfortunately been colloquially referred to as Gohan's eye. That seems to be the only edit, so let's just move on, please. Believe it or not, there is one more dub for this scene. If you're not neck deep into Dragon Ball's English dubbing history, you may be asking yourself, the fuck? Isn't that all of them? Ocean, Funimation's redub, and Kai? That's a fair question. Let me explain for just a moment, since this is information that is still fairly obscure. Most people know of Dragon Ball's first English dub, the Harmony Gold dub. That dub was created in December of 1989, later to be discontinued from United States television in February of 1990. Funimation as a company wouldn't be founded until 1994, and they wouldn't officially produce their first dubbing work until the fall of 1995, with their dub of the original Dragon Ball in association with BLT Productions. By now, all of this is pretty common knowledge amongst English-speaking Dragon Ball fans, but something to take note of is that Dragon Ball had disappeared from American television for well over 5 years. And that's still true. No Dragon Ball content was officially made in America in between 1990 and 1995. But America isn't the only country that speaks English, so did other countries make English dubs of the franchise? Well, aside from the UK, there's not that many. Most will point out the English dub made by Speedy Video that was produced in Malaysia from the late 90s to the mid-2000s. But there was another, one that was also produced in Southeast Asia, funnily enough. In 1993, an obscure English dub of Dragon Ball Z was produced on local television in the Philippines. It was aired on the at the time popular TV station RPN9 and was made by a company named the Creative Products Corporation. Creative had dubbed the first 26 episodes of Dragon Ball Z by this point, but later on in early 1996 they would continue dubbing the series from where they had left off, dubbing a total of 49 episodes. Creative has a lot of history behind their dub, which I won't get into here. I already have a much bigger video planned to discuss that. Take note that I said they first produced this dub in 1993. That means this is the second English dub of the Dragon Ball franchise as a whole, as well as the first English dub for Dragon Ball Z, 2 years before Funimation and the Ocean Group would get their hands on it. As for the quality of the dub, while it would get better as Creative would continue dubbing it, their early work, left a lot to be desired. If nothing else, it is fully uncut and censorship is never really a problem, at least not at this point. Most importantly, though, is that the script is incredibly accurate. While not perfectly in tune to the Japanese, a lot of it is far more in line than what Funimation would produce in 2006, although not as perfect as their dub of Kai. As far as the original Z goes, though, this is its most accurate dub, albeit with lukewarm voice acting. Enough babbling, though. I said that Creative dubbed 26 episodes of Z during this era. Episode 20 is most certainly a part of that number. While this dub is still mostly lost media, episode 20 is thankfully one of the few episodes that currently exists, so it can be enjoyed in all of its glory? Let's take a look at it. Our beginning scene is left mostly the same as the Japanese. Piccolo does tell Gohan to get up, he still tells him not to be cocky and calls him soft. Gohan still asks Piccolo for help when he's hanging from the cliff, and Piccolo telling him to climb back up all on his own is left intact. But the wording is a bit roundabout sometimes. In Japanese, Piccolo directly tells Gohan not to get cocky or full of himself. Here, Piccolo tells him don't be satisfied with it, referring to dodging his attacks. He also doesn't necessarily call him soft, he calls him weak, but potato, I guess. Gohan running back up the cliff is left the same, so no changes there. But now we get our weird segment, the actual joke that this video is about. Remember how I said that Creative's dub is incredibly accurate? Well, sometimes it can be accurate to a fault. In this scene, Creative actually attempts to adapt the Japanese joke into their dub, and like I said, doing so would be incredibly difficult and very confusing, and yeah, I'd say the result in this dub does bear that out. It's still very bizarre without proper context, but even more so than the Japanese version because at least that one would have been understood by people who speak Japanese. Here, not only will the audience not understand it at all, it's not even properly translated, and certain names are either excluded or are very loose translations. To be honest here, it just comes across like Gohan is calling Piccolo random names to get under his skin, like how I originally interpreted the scene without proper context. Here's everything that Gohan calls him in the Creative dub, along with some sort of visual of what they were in Japanese. Monster, shrimp, beast, snake, frog face, gorilla, lion, and pea-brain. And instead of telling Piccolo to say the next word, he words it as a question. Do you know what's next? And that just about covers everything. I'd say Funimation's dub of Kai is the perfect example of how English dubs are changed for the better when being adapted from Japanese. And Creative's dub is the epitome of how being too accurate can make things a bit more confusing than they need to be. I think this goes to show exactly what kind of changes go into making English dubs of animes and what sacrifices, additions, or compromises are required to be made in order to produce a quality adaptation. See you next time.